So I would like to introduce you Antje Stokman from Germany. So Antje will bring us the title of the presentation, Bridging the Gap, Working Beyond the Limits of Landscape Architecture. I would like to brief you shortly about Antje. She is a professor and practitioner of landscape architecture, and above everything, she won this year the Topos Landscape Award 2011. So she is a really good speaker. She will give us a nice performance here. So Antje, good luck.
Thank you very much. Okay, so for my today's presentation, according to the theme of the conference, I chose the title Bridging the Gap, Working Beyond the Limits of Landscape Architecture. And I think yesterday was really a great first day also for me to refer to now, because actually what Mary was introducing, the kind of projects she was doing, this was always what I was dreaming about when I was a student. This kind of great opportunities that you have in cities like in Singapore, these big projects coming up, and the opportunity to really work with the water and create urban spaces, waterfronts, all these kind of projects I imagined to be working on. And actually I was not aware of the reality that yesterday also Maria presented to us. I had never been working and living in other countries rather than in Europe. I took 1 year abroad. I studied in Germany and then I went to Edinburgh. After graduating, I graduated in the year 2000. I didn't find it very easy to find a job and find a firm where I could actually practice what I always imagined that what I would like to be doing, to imagine myself being a landscape architect. And I applied to many offices, especially to offices where I thought they are working internationally and they are also working in kind of large-scale projects. And I was accepted in an office in Munich, and I was very happy about that. And I was also excited within this office to have the opportunity, because they were starting to work on big projects in China, in Arab countries. And I was excited, but I had no experience and no idea what would then be my role as a landscape architect. And actually, it was really experiencing what Jan Gehl just described. You see this picture. This was one of my first projects that I did in China, and it was a big master plan for a new urban quarter. And I was the only landscape architect in a team of architects and engineers designing this new district. And I think it perfectly looks like what Jan Gehl just described. It was basically from a dropping bird ship, like having this huge view from the airplane, making a kind of grid, filling that with all different patterns of buildings. And for me, being a landscape architect within this team, of course we were only sub-consultants. It was the engineers and the architects who were commissioned, and we were coming into the project. And you can see this is the stage where they already got before we actually were part of the project. And you can see this kind of dream, everything around this urban area that they designed, it looks green. They just make it look like it's part of a forest, of a beautiful environment with a river flowing there that is blue, with nice balloons flying up in the air. And then it was me entering this project, and of course, this kind of image that both the architects, the engineers, and also the clients have is like, we take on the landscape architect to create something that they called Lake Paradise. This was actually the name of the project, because it was it was next to a river, but all the investors, they are having these images of, we need lakes, we want people to live at the waterfront and to be in close contact with the water. So I thought, this is great, this is a great chance for me as a landscape architect. Now I can take this title and I really want to do something with the landscape, and now it's up to me, even although I was not involved in this kind of urban planning, to come to the people scale and to look at how can I now design what's really on the ground. And also for me as a landscape architect, it was quite clear, okay, I have the arrangement of the buildings, I can design some nice water features, I can design pathways, I can design the steps going down to the water. And for me it was always clear that of course it must be green, because in all these images it was always shown as something green. And for me it was also clear that it's a lake paradise, so there should be some water, and it's the engineer's task to actually make it happen that I, as a landscape architect, have enough water to design all these lakes and waterfronts. And actually at that time, when I started these projects in the beginning of 2003, I and all the team, we were actually not even there in China. It was only our boss flying there, coming back with a contract, giving us the task. At that time there was not even any Google Earth, so we had no aerial views, we just had the maps. And this was really what I imagined when I designed it. And it was only 4 years later when I told my boss, after I had done many of these kind of projects, that I really want to go to China and I really want to see what am I doing there and what does it look like. And this area was already under construction that I had previously designed. And I was really in big shock, because when I went there and I went out of the site that I was not really supposed to go there, even the architects didn't really know, but this river that in all the renderings had always been blue and shiny, this over here, it's actually the rowing within the Olympic Games in Beijing, but this complete river was totally dried out. There was not a single drop of water. Of course, in our design, also in the design of Olympic Green, you might remember there are big lakes, and actually all the water is from the mountains. There are huge reservoirs, and it's completely put into the city for the architects to fulfill their dream of designing with water, of lake paradise, and also, of course, of consuming a lot of water. And what then happens is that we are designing the lake paradise. We are not looking outside our site. Even if we are designing how to get down to the water, it's still drinking water, which are the scarce resources. And what we're actually doing is we are designing a lake paradise 100 meters here, but what we are doing here is designing a landscape of river deserts, and also to hold the water within the designs. You need a huge effort to be capable, and in the end it always looks different than you think. It doesn't look like this natural image, but it looks like a concrete pond with stairways and small pagodas on the water. And for me this was really quite a shock, because I was not really prepared for this kind of situation, especially never having worked in countries like in China. And also in another project, it was a very mountainous area, and our image also was to actually do something to create this image of a mountain paradise. And also there, when I came to the site and I saw it for the first time, I realized that the first mountain had already been cut by 100 meters to create a flat surface to put a new district, because it's easier to put these kind of objects, like Jan Gehl described. It's not so easy to put them in a kind of very differentiated topography. So usually what the architects do is create a flat space, put their objects, and then I was left with this: what should I do with this now as a landscape architect? There was a valley here, there were the terraces here with apple trees. There used to be a river here, which was completely already filled. And of course, I'm a landscape architect. I was not really in the power of changing the design. And what then happens is that, of course, they want to still create a mountain paradise. So what you can see here is reconstructed mountains made from concrete to give a nice scenery like in Disneyland, which is all along the main highway here. And behind that, they put on the flat ground these apartments, and the real mountains, they are cut and they are put with concrete to stabilize them. And of course, everybody imagined, for me as a landscape architect, well, I mean, you sort of need to arrange that so that it looks beautiful anyways. The same thing in all these megacities. Jan Gehl, he actually ended his presentation with the challenge of the megacities. And for me, because I graduated in the year 2000, a lot of architects are now, also European architects, working in all these megacities. And actually all these megacities have a big desire for becoming green paradises, for putting a lot more green in the cities. But a lot of these megacities also have a huge problem about water stress. Yesterday we saw from Mary's presentation, she showed the contrast of designing in the lush green in Singapore and designing in the desert. I have been designing a lot in the desert, and actually Beijing is also almost like a desert city. The desert is coming really close, but most cities really don't believe, they don't want to believe they are desert cities, and they don't act like they are within the desert. Like for example in Lima, when you're in the middle of the city, you have all these green area, and because it's so expensive to make this kind of green carpets, there are signs everywhere. Don't walk on the grass. This is really just green, but it's against people. It's not for people, because people are supposed to walk on these small things. And also in China, it was quite a shock for me being in these parks and wanting to sit down like I'm used here in Europe. For me, parks are for also going on the grass. This is the purpose of the grass. But actually in these megacities, the grass becomes like also like an object just for looking and not even for the use of people. And telling people I'm a landscape architect, most clients, they believe, okay, landscape architect means you are responsible for all these designed plazas and parks and gardens, which also in the touristic city map, but also in the professional map, like this is the planning map of Lima in the municipal planning office. And you can see all these green dots, they are really green in terms of grass. Let's put grass there. And what's actually not even shown in these maps are the natural green elements. This, for example, is the Rimac River, which flows along here. And along the river you can find natural green, because there it's more moist. It is green there, whereas this all should be desert. But because the river is only considered something like an infrastructure for flood, for bringing water to the city, it's not even thought of as green. It's not thought of as me as a landscape architect being responsible for that. And in that way, it's a very difficult thing to actually think about this opportunities as a landscape architect. And also what Maria presented yesterday, this kind of similarity that happens. It was something, I mean, I never worked so globally before like Maria did, so for me it was actually quite a shock coming to all these, driving through the cultural landscape, driving through the rice paddy, seeing it all very wet, and then coming into the city and noticing, there's no more water, it's just dry but green, and also the same plants. And then in other situations like in Lima, driving through the desert, really feeling what is the context of the landscape, arriving to the city, and finding exactly the same species, finding exactly the same design concepts. And this is also what the clients are expecting. And for me, I always wanted to work in practice, and I wanted to find commissions. So I mean, how can I then react as a landscape architect also to this preconception of what is created? And how can I also react to things that I'm not responsible for as a landscape architect? Because even if there is space, even if there is an big open space where there's supposed to be a park, the engineers still believe it's better to keep the water in a minimum space and make it fully controlled and reserve all the space for green, which should never be flooded, so people should not be in danger. And in that way, there's a total separation. It's not really like what Mary showed yesterday. For me, it was never possible to actually touch the river, because this was where the engineers were. They said, okay, this is the height of the dike, this is the kind of treatment, engineering treatment for the river, and you are a landscape architect, you can look behind the dike, and then you can design a nice park, which then has nothing to do with the water. And for me, it was always not possible to find this kind of integration, and I really found that not only a physical gap between these elements, but also really a gap between the professions, because for me as a landscape architect, it was not even possible to talk to these engineers and also to the architects and to find my role really as part of the team and defining the project together, also bringing my perspective into it. And of course, what happens if the designs, especially in these megacities with these huge environmental challenges, if we move on in that way, we are increasing the problems in our man-made environments, and these are then solved again by even more aggressive engineering interventions. So the engineers, they are really kind of the winners, because more and more money needs to be put into these engineering projects to deal with these challenges. And of course the engineering is always thought of, this is really necessary. The World Bank, everybody, all the big investors, they put so much money into engineering. And for us as landscape architect, we need to wait until these decisions are made. Then we can come in the end, and of course there are always leftover spaces resulting from this engineering attitude. And then landscape works, they are perceived as something, okay, it's ugly, but then let's do something and still make it beautiful to deal with it. And if they can afford it, it's like putting something that then makes it look luxury, people can see it's costly, but landscape is usually not perceived as something that in the first place contributes something to the infrastructure project. It's only something to either hide or cosmetically beautify this kind of infrastructure projects, and we are also not coming in that stage where we have an influence on these kind of projects. This is actually New Orleans. After these walls have been breaking, you can see how also not so stable they look. I was in New Orleans, and they put so massive infrastructure now everywhere, and you can't imagine the amounts of money that are invested into these things now. And of course there are also the ecologists trying to protect the last islands of nature in the cities. And there are these different disciplines, and actually not really cooperating, but preparing their own grounds, fighting against each other. It's seen as a kind of contrast that technology is something against ecology, or ecology is something against design parks, which I don't really understand, because I think this should really be the quality of our profession. Being landscape architects, we should be able to integrate these things, to bridge these kind of gaps, and I think we really need to bring ourselves into a different kind of roles, not to be considered the ones who are only part of this, but we really need to take it as a whole picture. And this for me is really talking about bridging gaps, because I think we cannot really manage our cities, especially as we have just moved to being 7 billion people in the world, and as you all know, more than half of the world's population is now living in these huge cities. So we need to design our cities in a new way, because having these disciplines not being able to talk to each other, not being able to find integrated solutions that could save money overall, and only us being the ones who then contribute something to the kind of expensive luxury landscape, this is not the way to go. We will not survive if we continue like that. And actually, I think we, as landscape architects, it's also our responsibility, and we need to think of how we can take on a new role in this kind of setup, and how we can get involved in a new way, and how we can connect the different actors in a new way. And that we are not the ones coming into the project in the last and seen only as a sub-consultant, but how can we get involved in the formative role to define the kind of infrastructure projects that are going on, and how can we also redefine the way that these infrastructures interact with our human life worlds. This, of course, is not very easy, but I think we are in quite a good position as landscape architects, and I want to show you 4 strategies that I believe can help us to move forward and to be also from the public perceived as being in a good position within this topic. The first strategy is reclaiming infrastructure landscapes that are actually not functioning anymore, or have some problem, or even have fallen derelict. And I think this strategy, it's something that we as landscape architects, we are already perceived as a profession to deal with this. A friend of mine, he said, we as landscape architects, we are sometimes getting phone calls of engineers saying, we have a problem, something is not working, can you help us? I think this is still better than being called to, being better than if they only ask you to make something nicer. But if they really have a problem and we can help solving this problem, it's quite a good role. And there are a lot of places in the world where we have to deal with the transformation of industries, with the transformation also of the concept of infrastructure systems. So there are actually a lot of wastelands or derelict infrastructures. And it's probably also in Germany, in the Ruhr area, where this photo was taken, which is a very industrial area, and you all know this project. I don't need to talk about that in detail, but I think this really gave a new perception of what we as landscape architects can actually do. And Tilman Latz will be here speaking tomorrow, so he will probably tell you more about this. I don't want to go, but this gave us actually a new role to get involved with such kind of projects. And actually now this Ruhr area in Germany, I don't know whether you ever visited it, but it has become a tourism destination for this kind of activities that give a new meaning and a new function to these post-industrial landscape, where we keep the old infrastructure but we reinterpret it and give it a new use and a new meaning by people. And there are roots, it's called industrial nature. We invented this word, and actually because there's already quite a different biodiversity and we don't have the money to transform it, I think we can quite easily achieve what Maria told us yesterday, to integrate these different types of biodiversity into our designs. But there are also other sites, like for example this landfill site near Barcelona. This was where for years all the waste from Barcelona was filling up this valley, almost to the top. And after it was finished, this office was asked to design a park, which is actually also a very interesting concept, because they deal with the gas coming out of this wastewater, this treatment plant, and recycle the biogas. They deal with the water purification. So actually they add on top a new kind of infrastructure, which is now recultivation, but it's not only hiding, but it's actually dealing with the problem of making this landfill accessible after it has been finished, and transforming that into a place where people just put their dump, into a place where people now go and experience, this is where all the dump was put, but now we have a new way of recultivating this and bringing it back to our lives. And this concept of dealing with these post-industrial landscapes, it's not only something in Europe, but also in, like for example in China. This was the first international prize of the company Tourist. Maria showed us yesterday the project of the Red Ribbon. This is the same company, and their first international recognition was for this shipyard park. Of course the highlight, every tourist now going to New York, they all know, they all go here and want to experience how this derelict infrastructure that was almost knocked down, it was only due to initiative by citizens who had the idea to keep it and transform it into a park, and it became a competition. And now everybody is happy this project was carried out. And this is really a very, very public project. And I think all of us can make use of this, because it gives us a new meaning as a profession to be involved into such important and interesting projects. But of course, the way we cooperate with engineers, it's kind of limited, because we are only transforming infrastructures that are already going down. In a lot of areas in the world, we are in situations where new infrastructure systems need to be developed, because the current infrastructure systems, they are not working. For example, this is a wastewater pond in Favela in Brazil, and it's quite obvious we need new concepts for new infrastructure systems here. These are very inferior systems. This I found also for myself a good opportunity to get involved in a new way, but of course you need to also know some engineers, and you really need to get involved in the project definition itself. And I had this experience when working on a master plan for integrated water management and urban development in the city of Changde in China. And this city also grew a lot. There is a main river here with a big dike, and there was a secondary river in the back of the city, and the city now grows, and this river now is supposed to be developed as being in the middle of the city, whereas it used to be only the backyard. And the problem about this river is that it is the overflow of all these open wastewater channels and wastewater ponds that are just, they look like this. This is wastewater. It's in the middle of the city. There are roads going on top of it. There are pathways, people walking along it. And the overflow from this is going into this river, and you can imagine how polluted this is. And this city, they had the vision, okay, we want to develop this river as a new golden belt of our city. There's new urban quarters being developed here. The town hall is supposed to be placed next to the river, and they already gave designers the task to develop a vision of how this should be transformed into something green and beautiful. And you can see again in all the renderings, it looks all very beautiful. And this is something that can be done very easily. Every landscape architect, every architect can design something that is supposed to be looking beautiful, and then the municipality thinks, okay, now we need the engineering to come to make it achieve this and to make the water clean. It's not thought of as something integrated, but it's only thought as an engineering task. And actually a team of German engineers was invited. Our ministry also puts a lot of money because of course we want to export our technologies, and engineering is thought of as technologies, and our landscape is not thought of as technology. So our ministry has no interest in supporting us as landscape architects to export our knowledge. And so this big group of German engineers, they are actually all engineers, were invited only to propose some technique to actually clean up the river, to build a water treatment plant, to build a new sewage network. I was part of this team, we went there, and I also had a very big group of students who I worked with for one semester. And rather than only thinking about the technical issues, we try to understand what's really the problem about the water system. Why did it actually develop in that way, and how is the link between the urban development and the water infrastructure system? And the engineers, they don't usually think in that way. They think they have their models, and they had a huge problem because they didn't understand how the system works, and they didn't have the right data to put into their models. And for them, it's much harder to think in this kind of conceptually integrated way. And so with the students, we actually managed to do some visualizations and to really understand what actually is the problem, why this pollution within these open wastewater ponds actually happens, because the municipality kept telling us we have a separated system, we have a rainwater system, we have a wastewater system, and this should be rainwater, but it was really obvious it's no rainwater. And then we found out that all the investors, rather than putting two pipes, they just save money by putting only one pipe, which is then connected to the rainwater drain, which should be blue like rainwater, but then it becomes wastewater, and so the whole system doesn't work, and it's really a lack of control, and it's also not possible to change the already existing structure of the city. For the new expansion, maybe you can think of a different system, but here it is a mixed water system, and the engineers always wanted to separate the water, but it didn't work, and in that way they found no solution. And actually with the students, with the landscape architecture students, with discussing a lot with the engineers, you find, wow, this is not that difficult. It's actually quite simple techniques and also kind of simple problems. And by getting some ideas also from the engineers how to deal with these problems, it's not so difficult for landscape architects to understand the technical basis. For example, what's the problem about this wastewater pond here, and to find some solutions. And in this proposal, this was the final thesis of one Chinese landscape architecture student. She proposed to make this big pond, to separate that by making different chambers. One chamber is a very small one, which is only for the sewage water flowing in, which should then be pumped to the water treatment plant. And in case there is a rainfall, this water dilutes and the overflow is coming into a storage pond, which is still underground. But at the moment the system is so big, but she proposed to concentrate it. And when it rains even more, this water gets more and more diluted, so it's actually not that polluted anymore. And the overflow is then going through a huge biofilter system, which is a constructed wetland. And of course, this takes altogether a lot more space than the already existing systems of these ponds. But the idea was to use these as a design element for the park. So actually the park is not only something aesthetic, but the park becomes something that filters the water and that purifies the water, that integrates the use of people with the process of purifying the water. And in that way, of course, it's possible to also use a larger area for this and to design it more according to its performance and also to the change in seasons and to consider all these aspects. And these were proposals done by the landscape architecture students. The engineers, in the beginning, they were quite skeptical about that, but then they said, okay, in these areas in the city where we can't change the situation, maybe it's a good idea. And actually the city then liked it so much, and they thought this is really the way to go forward, that they commissioned us to do a master plan for the whole city, to think of how to connect these different reed beds and filter systems with the flows of water and the sources of the water, like what I had experienced in Beijing, that people don't think about the catchment and don't think about where the water comes from, what kind of water qualities could be used for which designs. We did this as an integrated approach for the whole city, and of course you need a lot of engineering expertise. We don't have that as landscape architects, and we don't even need that, but we can guide the teams with the engineers to do these calculations. We can work on the conceptual level, and we can bring ideas for a green infrastructure system on different levels, on the level of the regional system and the whole city. On the level of pilot projects, we identify different projects where we could change the situation. And actually now all this is under implementation, under the guidance of a team of 20 landscape architects with a lot of engineering firms around it, doing all the calculations, doing all the special things. And it's not really that us as landscape architects we were fighting with the engineers, but actually the engineers, they were also really happy to do a project where also their work becomes more visible in a kind of integrated design that's not only a pipe buried in the ground, and it's not only a water treatment plant somewhere outside the city where the people can't experience it, but the engineers were really happy about this idea of integrating their engineering expertise into a designed landscape that is appreciated by people, that is used by people. And in that way it was also a really good and very intense cooperation, but with a very different role for us as landscape architects. The third topic is a little bit more hard, because we have a lot of actual infrastructure systems in our landscape that are working quite well. Everybody believes, this is infrastructure, this is not landscape. It's the typical modern industries that we have. And it's not so easy to, as a landscape architect, to find somebody to contract you, because in this case, this is the largest company we have in Hanover, where I worked before. It's Volkswagen utility wagons, and this is their production facilities. And they had no money, and they didn't want to give any contract to a landscape architect, even although this landscape is not designed for people, it's also not designed for biodiversity, it's only designed for production and for parking. There's no single tree here in this parking lot. The people have to walk across it in the sun in the summer without any shade. There's no infiltration of water. This area is 97% sealed surfaces of this whole area. And there was no way of, as a landscape architect, going there and telling them, oh, I would like to make a beautiful car park, because this is what they were not interested in. They were just only interested in economics. But what we found out, because I worked with the same engineers in this China project, and I asked them, in Germany we have a split fee for rainwater and for wastewater, and for rainwater, the private persons and also the companies, they have to pay a fee according to the amount of sealed surfaces. And if you reduce the sealed surfaces on your property, you actually pay less fee. And in that way, it becomes an economical argument. This is what we always call ecosystem services, because it should give some benefit. If you infiltrate some water, you need less infrastructure. So how can you calculate that? That needs to be paid back. And so we asked Volkswagen, and I called the municipal sewage company, and I asked them, how much fee is Volkswagen actually paying for 97% sealed surfaces on such a large area? And they told me it was 750,000 euros per year only to pay for rainwater going to this small stream, which in the summer is completely dried out because there's no recharge of the groundwater table, so the natural water level has dropped, and there's no more natural water in this river, but every time that it rains, there's a huge flush of the whole river, and this is what Volkswagen needs to pay for. So actually we talked to them and we said, well, we are landscape architects, but and we also want to do something for designing this area, but actually what we are looking at, how can we pay back the investment by thinking of the rainwater not only as something that goes directly to the stream, whereas they are recycling all other kinds of water as part of their production process, and how could we think of the rainwater also as a resource that can either be recycled and put back into the production process, or that could be infiltrated, or that could be stored and released more slowly. And we always were in contact with the municipal sewage authority and discussed with them how much would then actually be the cost saving for Volkswagen to implement these measures. And of course it's quite an engineering thinking again, but it's actually not that difficult, and we had engineers as part of our teams in the landscape faculty, and we thought about the different types of, if we consider this also as landscape. Of course, it's not a people's landscape, and it's also no vegetation yet. But if we add different elements, then we can combine the catchment of water, the recycling of water, with also design features. And we thought about these different elements, what could be done on the roof, like roof greening, like holding back water on the roof, what could be done in the car park, what could be done in these different areas. And we calculated by combining all these different single elements, by multiplying them with the surface, by running models with the rainfall data, and we found out that actually 80% of water, of rainwater, could be held back if we combined all these different measures. And in that way, of course, Volkswagen got very interested economically, and what was interesting then, after we convinced them of the general idea, they became very interested in how this actually looks like. And in the end, we discussed a lot with them how, by transforming these areas that are also for the workers, where they go outside, and at the moment they only sit here on this small grass, there's a small bench, and they look directly here to the cars, and we proposed to make it like a sunken area with plants that can be drowned also, and in the case of a rain event, you use this as a storage for rainwater, where you can catch a lot of water, and this is when the people don't use this anyways. And in that way, you can combine this economical perspective of holding back the rainwater by giving a better space to the people, and by increasing the biodiversity rather than only having this grass here, to put a more rich planting in these areas. And so that was a very interesting experience to find a way to even work with these companies who think, well, all their production is going fine, there is no necessity for doing something, by finding these economical reasons and by finding a way of combining this infrastructure thinking with design thinking, that it becomes feasible for them, and it gives us a new, because we were initiating this process, it gives us a new purpose. And of course, looking into the future, it's not only to upgrade my inferior systems, it's not only to improve already existing systems, but looking at the growth of megacities, looking at what happens in climate change. There is a big need for rethinking infrastructure systems and for really thinking of new forms of infrastructure systems. And it's a big discussion now in the whole world about delta cities, because a lot of cities, also the city where I live, Hamburg, they are situated in these low-lying, very dynamic delta areas that are affected by climate change in terms of rising sea levels. And it's actually 2/3 of all megacities in the whole world that are actually situated in these low-lying areas affected by rising sea levels. So if we invent something here, this can really be replicated in a lot of areas, and there is now a network, a worldwide network of delta cities. They have meeting in different places. This year it's in Jakarta, last year it was in Rotterdam. And they are discussing the challenges and also what could be done. And in Hamburg, with our office, we are trying to develop strategies for the future of Hamburg, because we have this close relationship with the river, and we also have the close relationship with the harbor that's directly opposite the river. So it's still a very active harbor. But because of the rising sea level and also because of the rising tides, we have to heighten our dikes. Every 10 years, the dikes need to be made higher and stronger. This is also what happens in New Orleans now. And this is then what, you are a harbor city, you are a city on the river, but actually you can't see the river anywhere. This is the normal on the island of the Elbe. This is the dike. People live here and they don't know it's the river just behind that. So people are thinking now how to create more space again for the water, because if you give more space, then the water could spread out into larger areas. And when you also look into the future, you need to understand that also in the past, this concept of dikes and the concept of protection has changed a lot. Not only in terms of the shape of the dikes, that are also essentially landscape features, but also in terms of the shapes of ring dikes becoming connected to each other, the dikes being shifted completely. And you can see this engineering, if you think of it in terms of landscape planning, it has a much larger impact on actually the shape and the functioning of our landscapes than what we as landscape architects could possibly do. So if we ally with these people and we integrate our thinking with their thinking, we can have a huge impact also on the future of the formation in between land and water. And we really need a paradigm shift and now, because always the dikes have been moved in front of the old dike line. They have always taken away more space from the water. And whereas in 1962, the dike line was still multifunctional, with a road on top of it, with buildings on top of it, people living on the dike. They found out this is not stable enough, so they put the new dike line, and everything is forbidden here. You're not allowed to walk on the dike. There's no path on top of it. There's no path here. The dike is directly in front of the water, so there's no area in front of the dike where you can actually go. And this is an island here, and if we tried it, and 9 out of 10 people on this island can't tell you where it's actually possible to access the water, even although they live in an island. And so we have started a process together with Hamburg Port Authority and together with the dike authorities to promote new ideas that we need to give back more space to the water, which doesn't mean that we need only nature to move back, but we need to think of new economies, of new ways of building in these landscapes, of new lifestyles that don't need to keep the water out, but that actually invite the water in. And we did a lot of workshops, a lot of excursions with, this is like the head of the Hamburg Port Authority. We went to the mouth of the River Elbe, and he explained us all about the dynamics of the estuary. This is a big workshop where we invited colleagues from Rotterdam and other cities to think of ideas. And we developed strategies and spatial visions. If we now shift this paradigm and we want to give more space to the water, how could we promote landscape of Hamburg to become a tidal landscape and Hamburg to become a tidal city, to have it as a fully new vision of integrating spatial development and giving back space to the water by activating new spaces for new kinds of leisure activities, for new kinds of ways of living with the water, on the water, by talking to the agricultural chambers, to think of new types of economies that can be combined with having more space for the water. And this has now become quite a big project and a big movement. It's been discussed in the newspaper. We have published a website and a book. We have designed an exhibition that has now been shown in different areas, different places in the city, to initiate a public debate. So far people have always accepted we need to be safe. Okay, so we need to accept this engineering to protect us, and this was the only objective. But we believe it needs to be more multifunctional. Safety doesn't mean that we as people are not able to use these landscapes anymore, and this is something that we as landscape architects can really promote, how to combine these engineering issues with the issues of designing new landscapes. This is a new tidal lake now that has already been designed by engineers, and we try to convince them to also do something for people to experience this area by developing new ideas of transforming existing elements. For example, this is only a pumping station, how to add something to it so that people can get on top, they can see something, to put an exhibition there. These are the kind of projects that we have been pushing forward in Hamburg, together with the authorities, the engineering authorities, with a lot of engineers, to think of the future of Hamburg and to think of a new concept of infrastructure system which is not against people to protect them, but which is something to create new forms of activities and lifestyle and economies with the people. And seeing all these strategies together again, I think if we really follow this way as landscape architects, and we are not too shy, we really discuss with engineers, we get involved with them, we can gradually really increase our impact. Of course, we always work with architects, we've always done that, but I think the engineers for us are also a new group to get used to, and to bridge the gap between these two professions, and to think of landscapes also, like we just heard from Jan Gehl, not to think of it only in terms of objects, in terms of images that we are designing, but to also for us to think in terms of performance. We are designing performing landscapes, performing in terms of integrating people, performing in terms of integrating a much richer biodiversity, and performing in terms of serving as an infrastructure system for the city, and which is often really the contrary of what we were used to be doing. We are used to keep out the flood, but now we design landscapes that invite the flood. We were used to, like we also saw how many fertilizers are being used to keep up these lawns, how many money is being spent. But now we can combine this investment with purifying water, with growing food, with purifying soils also. And this is really a paradigm shift that we as landscape architects can promote. Of course, we need a lot of cooperation to be able to do that, but there is also a lot of opportunities now. There are a lot of competitions coming up, a lot of proposals. For example, this one I really like. This was a competition last year, and the name was "Whoever rules the sewers rules the city." So how can we as landscape architects also take over thinking about the sewer systems? In that way, we really gain a lot more power. And also not to think only in terms of putting objects and showing how beautiful our designs look, but think of how do our designs actually perform, how do they change, what do they actually do. We try to find new methods with our students to also design different types of models like these ones, explaining about the performance of the river Elbe, what actually happens if you give more space, how then when you put a dike, how it changes the system. So it's more like a systems thinking, and this has been documented, the film teams came, and it's been a really interesting experience. And to finish this kind of paradigm shift, for also our clients or the general public to believe, landscape architects, you are the gardeners, you are doing something beautiful, you are taking out plants, you are selecting certain species that you consider as beautiful, and you arrange them and design them in a certain setup to create a certain picture. Like this symbolizes for me taking these pearls out of the natural environment and creating something that looks very beautiful, and to change this perception into something that for me is illustrated very well by this artist Hubert Dupois. Maybe you can show the movie now, because this here is actually a movie. And his idea was to provide the larvae who build these shells as an infrastructure to protect themselves, to provide them with a new material that for them is also like the normal materials they use. They usually use small stones and wood, and he gave them pearls and gold, the very expensive materials. And of course the larvae behave like they always do. They use it to build their protection. In that way, they, by themselves, create a performing system which, for people, becomes a different meaning, because now suddenly it's something that is very attractive, very beautiful, and it combines the performing ecology, it combines the cultural meaning with us humans as part of an environment where we think of infrastructure, we think of ecology, and we combine that with the design. So this is what for me also means bridging the gap. I've been trying to jump into these kind of corporations and thinking what kind of new fields can we as a landscape architecture profession enter. This is why I called it working beyond the limits of landscape architecture. And in the next topos issue, which will be in December, it will be the topic of leadership. And in this topos, there will be a lot of these issues discussed by different people and projects. And also, I have written an article because of this topos award, also in terms of this, what could be a new kind of leadership for the profession of landscape architecture. So, if you're interested, you can read more. And thank you very much for your attention.